Ladies and gentlemen, every human being wears a mask, but behind that mask lives a deeper reality, the shadow, the hidden self. We often believe that our motivation, our drive, and our identity come from strength and clarity, yet much of it is built upon illusions we carefully protect. When the shadow rises into view, the familiar energy fades, the old self trembles, and we feel as though the fire within us has gone out. But this loss is not an end, it is the beginning of transformation. Tonight, I invite you to walk with me through this journey, from the encounter with the shadow, to the collapse of false motivation, to the pause of transformation, to the restoration of energy through integration, and finally, toward the path from mask to wholeness. The shadow, as hidden self, is one of the most profound realities of human existence. It represents those parts of our being that remain concealed, not because they do not exist, but because we choose not to look at them. Every individual creates an image, a mask, a persona that they show to the world. This image is carefully crafted, shaped by family expectations, cultural norms, and the desire to be accepted. Yet behind this image lies another side, a reservoir of qualities, emotions, and impulses that are pushed away, often because they do not fit the picture we want to present. That hidden side is the shadow. The shadow is not necessarily dark in the sense of being evil, but it is dark because it is unseen. It holds anger that we do not admit we feel, jealousy that we refuse to acknowledge, fears that we bury beneath a confident exterior. At the same time, it may also contain strengths and talents we suppress because they did not fit the role we were told to play. Perhaps a child learns to hide their creativity because it was mocked, or their sensitivity because it was called weakness. Over time, these disowned parts are stored away in the shadow, waiting to be remembered. When one begins to glimpse the shadow, it feels like encountering a stranger who lives within. This stranger knows things about us that we do not want others to know. It whispers truths we try to silence, and yet, it is us. It is not separate, it is not foreign, it is the hidden self. The discomfort we feel in such encounters comes from the clash between the polished image we hold and the raw truth that arises from within. It is easier to project this hidden material onto others than to recognize it in ourselves. We notice arrogance in someone else without realizing that the same seed exists within us. We condemn another person's weakness while secretly fearing our own. The shadow often shows up in what irritates us most about others because we unconsciously push those qualities away from our own awareness. The existence of the shadow is essential to the structure of the psyche. Without it, we would not develop the social masks that allow us to live in communities, but without facing it, we cannot become whole. The hidden self exerts its influence whether we acknowledge it or not. It appears in dreams as mysterious figures, in slips of the tongue, in sudden bursts of emotion that seem to come from nowhere. It can control us precisely because it is unseen. By ignoring it, we do not erase it, we only make it more powerful. Recognizing the shadow requires honesty and courage. It is not an intellectual exercise, but a direct encounter with uncomfortable truths. To admit, for example, that beneath our kindness lies resentment, or that under our confidence lives insecurity, can feel like betrayal of the self-image we have worked so hard to protect. But this act of recognition is not a betrayal, it is an unveiling. It allows us to see the totality of who we are, rather than clinging to fragments. The hidden self is not a prison, but a treasury. Within it lie repressed passions that, once acknowledged, can become sources of vitality. The anger we bury may transform into assertiveness. The fear we hide may give birth to caution and wisdom. The sensitivity we suppress may become deep empathy. Every disowned part contains an energy that, if reclaimed, enriches the personality. The shadow is not only the container of what we fear to be, but also of what we might become. To face the shadow is to stand at the threshold of authenticity. It demands that we stop living only for appearances and begin to live with depth. The process is never simple because the shadow resists exposure. It prefers to stay in the dark, to continue shaping us from behind the curtain. Yet when we dare to look at it, we discover that it is not an enemy, but a mirror. It reflects all that we are, not only the parts we choose to see. It asks us to accept contradiction within ourselves, to hold together light and dark, strength and weakness, love and fear. In every human being, the shadow is the hidden self, and in that hidden self lies the key to true wholeness. To deny it is to remain divided. To acknowledge it is to begin the journey toward integration. The collapse of false motivation is an experience that often arrives suddenly, yet its roots stretch far back into the way a person constructs their identity. Much of what drives us in life is not born from the core of who we are, but from the surface image we present to others and to ourselves. We work hard to achieve, to prove, to maintain appearances, to hold on to the picture of the self we want the world to see. This energy, though it feels powerful at times, is fragile because it is built upon illusion. It is not sustained by the depths of the psyche, but by the approval of others and the stories we tell ourselves about what makes us valuable. At first, this kind of motivation can seem unstoppable. It pushes someone to excel in their career, to project confidence, to strive for recognition. But beneath it lies a deep insecurity. The motivation is not pure desire, it is compensation. It compensates for feelings of inadequacy, for the fear of being ordinary, for the terror of being unworthy. When success comes, it feeds the illusion. When failure comes, the entire structure trembles. The collapse begins when something exposes the gap between the image and the truth. One of the most powerful moments of collapse occurs when a person confronts their shadow. The shadow holds everything that contradicts the image, all the qualities we reject. For someone who believes themselves endlessly kind, the shadow reveals resentment. For someone who builds their life on confidence, the shadow uncovers self-doubt. For someone who depends on control, the shadow presents chaos. In that instant of revelation, the scaffolding of false motivation crumbles. The drive that came from maintaining the mask loses its power because the mask itself is pierced. The experience feels like exhaustion, but it is more than physical tiredness. It is the draining of psychic energy that had been invested in holding up a false self. Imagine spending years carrying a heavy costume, pretending it is your skin. When it is ripped away, not only does the act of pretending stop, but the will to continue in the old way disappears. Motivation collapses because its foundation was never authentic desire, it was fear of exposure. Once exposure happens, the fear has nothing left to sustain. This collapse can feel terrifying because it empties the person of direction. They may feel as though they no longer know why they are moving forward at all. Without the illusion of perfection to chase, the old sources of energy vanish. The achiever, once fueled by ambition, wakes up and cannot find a reason to keep running. The helper, once motivated by being needed, feels drained when they see the resentment hidden behind their service. The confident leader, once sustained by the praise of others, falters when insecurity rises from within. The collapse strips them bare, leaving only silence. Yet in this silence lies the truth of what has happened. The false motivation was never sustainable because it was borrowed energy, not genuine. Borrowed energy always runs out, whether it comes from the admiration of others, the pressure of comparison, or the attempt to silence the inner critic. When the shadow is revealed, those sources dry up. What collapses is not life itself, but the illusion that one can live forever on masks and approval. The psyche, in its wisdom, withdraws energy from the false so that it can redirect it toward the real. The collapse of false motivation often resembles a dark night of the soul. A person may wander through days feeling numb, directionless, as though the ground beneath them has been removed. They look back at the things that once gave them fire and wonder why they no longer care. They may attempt to force themselves back into the old rhythm, but the energy refuses to return. No matter how hard they push, the flame does not reignite. This is because the collapse is not accidental, it is necessary. The psyche is insisting on a deeper path. To experience the collapse of false motivation is to discover that one cannot be carried forever by illusions. The image of the self, no matter how carefully polished, cannot sustain the inner life in death. Innately, the collapse comes as a breaking point, but it is also a clearing. The rubble of illusions makes space for a truer form of energy to emerge, one that does not depend on masks or approval, but arises naturally from the depths of the self. The pause of transformation is a mysterious interval that often unsettles the human spirit. It appears after something has collapsed, an illusion, a false motivation, a carefully constructed identity, and before something new has been born. It is a space between two worlds, where the old no longer functions, but the new has not yet taken shape. This pause is rarely comfortable. It can feel like emptiness, like stillness, like waiting without knowing what one is waiting for. And yet, it is within this very pause that transformation quietly begins to unfold. The psyche does not move in straight lines. It does not leap from one stage to another without hesitation. It works more like nature itself, cycles of growth, death, rest and rebirth. Just as winter is required before spring, so too does the soul require a season of stillness before renewal. The pause of transformation is that inner winter. Energy, once flowing outward in the pursuit of goals or identities, withdraws inward. What was once full of movement becomes quiet. This withdrawal feels to the conscious mind like loss, like stagnation. but it is actually conservation. The psyche pulls back its forces so that they can reorganize, heal, and prepare for the next stage of growth. In this pause, a person often feels a lack of direction. The fire that once fueled ambition goes out, and no immediate spark takes its place. The individual may question themselves. Why do I no longer care about what once inspired me? Why can't I force myself to keep moving? The answer lies in the nature of transformation itself. Change at the deepest levels cannot occur while one is rushing ahead. To evolve, one must stop, turn inward, and allow the unconscious material, the shadow, the forgotten memories, the suppressed emotions, to rise and find their place within. The pause is the psyche's way of demanding that integration take precedence over action. During this time, silence becomes a teacher. The person sits with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the absence of clarity. The natural impulse is to escape it, to fill the void with distractions, to cling desperately to old motivations even when they no longer fit. But the pause resists such efforts. The more one tries to force movement, the heavier the stillness becomes. The pause cannot be bypassed. It must be endured. And in that endurance, something subtle happens. Awareness begins to deepen. One sees patterns that were invisible before, truths that were buried beneath constant striving. The pause is not inactivity, it is inner activity, disguised as stillness. On the surface, life may feel flat, but beneath the surface, energies are rearranging. Old wounds are surfacing for healing, old identities are loosening their grip, and new possibilities are forming in silence. It is like the chrysalis stage of a butterfly. To an outside observer, nothing seems to be happening as the caterpillar rests in stillness. But within the cocoon, an entire transformation is underway. Cells are dissolving, reshaping, reorganizing into wings that will one day fly. The pause of transformation is the human cocoon. This stage can also bring fear because it resembles emptiness, and emptiness feels threatening to the ego. The ego thrives on clarity, plans, and control. When faced with the unknown, it panics. But transformation cannot occur without surrendering control, without stepping into the unknown. The pause strips the ego of its illusions and demands trust in a process that cannot be fully seen or understood. To remain in the pause without fleeing from it is one of the greatest tests of inner strength. People often describe this time as a dark night of the soul, a period when the light seems absent. Yet it is precisely in the dark that the psyche plants its seeds. Just as a seed must rest underground before it sprouts, so too must a human being rest in the unseen depths before new life emerges. This waiting is not wasted time, it is incubation. The self is being prepared for a higher integration, even if the conscious mind feels abandoned or lost. The pause of transformation is therefore a sacred interval. It strips away movement so that renewal can take place. It demands patience, humility, and the ability to sit with uncertainty. The individual who endures it without rushing, who learns to listen to its silence, eventually emerges with a new clarity, a new wholeness, and a source of energy that is not borrowed, but authentic. Integration restores energy in a way that no external push or artificial source of motivation ever can. When the psyche is divided, when parts of the self are denied, repressed, or hidden, tremendous amounts of energy are consumed just to keep those parts out of awareness. The act of suppression is not passive. It requires constant vigilance, a continuous draining of inner resources. A person may believe they are strong because they carry on, because they maintain an image, because they never allow the hidden self to surface. Yet underneath this facade, their strength is being siphoned away by the battle within. The shadow once pushed out of consciousness does not disappear. It lingers, watching from the depths, waiting to be acknowledged. The more it is resisted, the louder it becomes, though its voice is disguised in subtle ways. Exhaustion, anxiety, bursts of anger, unexplainable sadness. What appears as random mood swings or lack of energy is often the shadow's demand for recognition. Until that demand is answered, energy leaks away, flowing into the task of resistance. Integration changes this dynamic completely. When the hidden parts of the self are allowed to step into awareness, they no longer need to fight for existence. The psyche no longer needs to spend its strength suppressing them. Instead, that strength returns to the individual in the form of vitality, focus, and creativity. What once drained becomes a source. The anger that consumed energy when hidden may transform into a clear sense of boundaries. The fear that crippled motivation when suppressed may turn into carefulness and wisdom when accepted. The sensitivity that felt like weakness in the shadows may become deep compassion once integrated. Every reclaimed fragment carries with it a piece of power. To integrate is not to indulge every impulse or to act out every hidden desire. It is to recognize these forces as part of the self, to acknowledge their presence without judgment, and to find them a rightful place in the inner order. A person who admits, "Yes, I feel envy at times," no longer wastes energy pretending to be endlessly generous. A person who says, "Yes, I carry fear," no longer exhausts themselves in maintaining a mask of invulnerability. The simple act of acceptance releases energy that was bound up in denial. This process often feels like light returning after a long period of dimness. The individual notices they can breathe more freely, that their body feels less tense, that their mind is less preoccupied with defending an image. Relationships shift as well because the energy once spent hiding flaws is now available for authentic connection. Instead of projecting the shadow onto others, one begins to see people more clearly because one is no longer blinded by their own repressed qualities. This clarity itself is energizing. Integration also restores creativity. The hidden self holds not only dark impulses but also neglected talents and forgotten dreams. When these are reintegrated, the person finds new streams of inspiration. An artist who suppressed their passion because it felt impractical may suddenly feel alive again when they reclaim that part. A thinker who silenced their curiosity to fit into rigid structures may rediscover their love of exploration. The energy that emerges is not a temporary spark, but a steady current, because it flows from the depths of the psyche rather than the surface. There is also a physical dimension to this restoration. The body responds to the release of repression. Tension softens, the nervous system finds balance, and vitality returns. This is because the mind and body are not separate. The energy lost in psychological denial manifests as fatigue, illness, or restlessness in the body. When integration occurs, the harmony between inner and outer self brings renewal not only to the mind, but to the physical being as well. Perhaps most importantly, integration restores trust in oneself. When one lives divided, one fears what might break through from the hidden depths. This constant fear erodes confidence and consumes inner strength. But when the hidden parts are faced and welcomed, the individual no longer lives in fear of themselves. The energy that was once tied up in inner conflict becomes available for purposeful living. The self feels whole, and wholeness carries a natural vitality that requires no external push. Integration is not an instant event, but a gradual unfolding. Each part of the shadow brought into awareness returns a measure of strength. Over time, this accumulation builds a reservoir of energy far greater than any false motivation could provide. It is an energy born not of illusion, not of fear, but of authenticity. To be whole is to be alive in the deepest sense, and with wholeness comes the quiet power to move forward with clarity and strength. From mask to wholeness is a journey that every human being is called to take, whether consciously or unconsciously. The mask, or persona, is the first stage of self we create, and it is essential for survival. It allows us to present ourselves to the world in a way that society accepts, to play roles that help us belong, to adapt to the expectations of family, culture, and community. A child quickly learns that certain behaviors are rewarded and others are punished, and from this learning, the mask is formed. Smiles replace tears, silence hides anger, confidence is performed even when fear trembles underneath. The mask is not false in itself, but it is partial. It is only one side of who we are, carefully polished for others to see. Living behind the mask is both protective and limiting. It shields us from rejection, but it also distances us from our deeper truth. Many people spend their lives perfecting this surface image, pouring their energy into maintaining appearances, building careers, and shaping reputations. But no mask can cover the totality of the self forever. The shadow, the repressed emotions, the denied traits, and the forgotten potentials eventually press against the edges. They appear in dreams, in moments of crisis, in sudden outbursts, or in feelings of emptiness that no achievement can fill. These signals remind us that life behind the mask is only half a life. The path toward wholeness begins when the mask begins to crack. Sometimes this happens through suffering, when failure or loss shatters the persona we worked so hard to protect. Sometimes it happens through self-reflection, when we grow tired of pretending and long for authenticity. In either case, the recognition dawns that we are more than the roles we play, more than the image we show. This recognition is unsettling at first because it strips away certainty. Without the mask, who are we? The answer does not come quickly. Wholeness is not found in rushing to replace one mask with another, but in turning inward to embrace what has long been hidden. Moving from mask to wholeness requires an encounter with the shadow. The anger denied, the fears suppressed, the insecurities buried, all must be faced. Yet wholeness does not mean indulging these forces blindly. It means acknowledging them, giving them a place in the inner order, understanding that they too belong to the total picture of the self. The mask wanted only to show strength, but wholeness allows both strength and weakness. The mask wanted only to display kindness, but wholeness embraces kindness along with resentment. The mask wanted only confidence, but wholeness accepts vulnerability as part of being human. Each time a hidden aspect is welcomed, the self becomes less divided. As this process deepens, the individual discovers that wholeness is not about perfection, but integration. To be whole is not to erase flaws, but to hold contradictions together without denial. Light and shadow, joy and sorrow, love and fear all coexist within the same being. When one lives in this state, energy no longer drains into repression or pretense. The person feels alive in a way that the mask could never provide, because they no longer waste strength defending an image. What emerges is a natural authenticity, a sense of being at ease with oneself, whether praised or criticized, accepted or rejected. Relationships also change along this journey. When living behind the mask, connections are shallow because others are relating not to the true self, but to the role being played. Wholeness allows genuine intimacy because the individual no longer hides large parts of themselves. Others are met as they are, not as projections of denied qualities. The need to blame, to judge, to compare diminishes because one has come to terms with those same tendencies within. Wholeness opens the door to compassion, not only for oneself, but for others who struggle with their own masks and shadows. The movement from mask to wholeness is not a single moment, but a lifelong unfolding. The mask is never completely discarded because society requires roles and appearances. Yet the difference lies in awareness. One may wear the mask when needed, but one is no longer imprisoned by it. Beneath the surface, the whole self is known and accepted. The mask becomes a tool, not an identity. The deeper identity rests in wholeness, in the unity of all parts of the psyche, in the recognition that nothing within must be rejected, only understood and integrated. To live from this place is to live with a steady flame of vitality. The energy once spent maintaining a fragile image is now available for creativity, love, and purpose. The journey from mask to wholeness is the return to authenticity, where life is not an endless performance, but an expression of the entire self, hidden and visible, broken and healed, human and whole. To lose motivation after facing your shadow is not a failure, but a passage. It is the silence before renewal, the winter before spring, the cocoon before wings. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the hidden part of yourself asking to be seen. And when you embrace it, when you allow every fragment of your being to return home, you rise no longer divided, but whole. Wholeness does not flicker like a borrowed flame. It shines with the steady light of authenticity, and that light, once found, becomes the guiding force of a life lived with truth, depth, and unshakable strength.